tutorial I used to learn how to do it said 5/8 and then trim, and I was like, why are you making me do this? Either way, once you do that, you open it up, and then you press your seam finish towards one side of your fabric. So I'm pressing my brown towards my blue, and then I'm flipping it over and pressing it again just to make sure that seam is nice and crisp and clean. And then I'm folding my fabric on top of itself, so right sides are together. This is now when I have my right sides together, so my pretty sides are facing each other, and I'm taking care to make this seam right on that edge of the fabric. I want that right there on that edge. And you press again. There's a lot of pressing with both flat felled and French seam. Now that I have it pressed so that right sides are together and it has a nice crisp clean edge, if you're doing a long one, you pin it. I'm not going to bother with pinning it because this is like 3 inches and I trust myself. If you don't trust yourself, you should totally pin it. Now you sew at your 5/8 seam allowance or whatever size seam allowance you're doing. The big thing is you want to make sure that your seam allowance is wider than the edge that you just trimmed and ironed down. So you don't want the raw edge of your fabric to be visible once you turn this right sides out. So I'm sewing it at a 5/8 seam allowance. And I'm taking care to make sure that my ironing doesn't get messed up. If I pinned, I wouldn't have to care so much. And I need to take my machine into the doctor. So here it is at a 5/8 seam allowance. I could now open it up, and all of those raw edges are inside that little loop. You can technically stop right now. I never do. When I'm doing a French seam, and I think it looks nicer this way, though I suppose it might depend what fabric you're using if you want to use this next step. I always press this nice thick seam finish to one side again. Turn it over. Press it again. And then I'm going, so I have it nice and crisp and clean. And I'm going to do a top stitch down so that my thick French seam isn't going to be waving around. So I'm just going to top stitch it close to that edge of that French seam finish. And I think this makes it look nicer. I suppose if I was doing something on lace or sheer fabric, I may not do this top stitch. I haven't worked a lot with sheer fabrics and lace, but I absolutely did this top stitch when I was doing my brocade work. So now that flat felled is nice and stitched down, and we have a top stitch effect up at the top of the seam. So again, this is excellent for, it's a super secure stitch. The seam finish will never come undone. I should keep these for examples if I ever teach this class not online. And those are the 3 seam finishing techniques I wanted to go over today that you can do with any machine. Alina, I see you unmuted.
Yes, I have a couple of to add.
Okay.
Additionally, you can use bias tape, single fold or double fold. This is double fold. This is single fold. Nobody likes bias tape, and it looks cheap, but it is a legit
It's legit
finish, especially with wonky fabrics like wool or in some loosely woven linen.
Yes, and on that note, I'm going to bring out Hemming tape is a thing. I was specifically making this one for things people can do with just machines, but you're absolutely right. Bias tape works, and we have 40 minutes, and I could show you all how to do that.
And piping.
Piping. I've never used piping. I have piping, and I've thought about using it. I see Sven, you put in the comments, French seam also works on linen and cotton with a question mark. Yes, it does. If I'm doing linen and cotton, I usually just do flat felled, but you can absolutely do French seam. We do have 40 minutes, so I might go ahead and show how you would use a bias tape, or this is a hemming tape, so I'll go ahead and show hemming tape. Hemming tape is a thing that you can use, and I don't use it a lot, because if I'm hemming, I usually just do a double fold hem. But it's a thing. Sewing. Let me pull out. I only prepped a couple, 3 pieces, but that's fine. It's a thing, you can use it. And any craft store will carry bias tape or hemming tape. They're super common. So let's see. Do I want to show you hemming tape for hemming or for seam finishes? It's the same concept either way. All right, hemming tape. Here we go. You take your fabric, right sides together. This isn't going to line up like a perfect square like the other ones did. Right sides together. And do a 5/8 seam. Sweet. 5/8 seam. Whoop whoop. And then I'm going to press it again because I love pressing. And you just press it to one side and turn it over and press the other side so it looks, make sure it looks nice. Sweet, hemming tape. So hemming tape, you put it so it covers the raw edge. I'm gonna pin this one actually. I do use pins. So when you're pinning, you make sure your fabric's flat so you don't get bunched up and accidentally pin in the wrong section. Cool. There we go. So, seam finish hemming tape. Here I have it pinned so it's covering up the raw edge is in the middle of the hemming tape. So one half is on, the raw edge is in the middle. Wherever your raw edge, just make sure it's in the middle. And then the big thing, then you go and you position your needle so that it's on the edge of your hemming tape. And then never run over pins. Always secure stitch or back stitch. And then sew a straight stitch right on the edge of that hemming tape. So now I've done one half of my hemming tape. Now for my other half, you position it just on the other side of your hemming tape. Just like it's almost exactly like you're just sewing trim on. In fact, it is exactly like sewing trim. So here we have a lovely hemming tape that we've used for a seam finish. That's what it looks like on the other side. If I'm using hemming tape to hem something, which is what it was designed for, so I suppose I should show you that. Oh wait, that's not where we start. You start by not at the ironing board. You start at your sewing machine, and then you take your hemming tape and you put it on the edge of your fabric. And I should pin that, but I'm not going to. If you are not me, you should pin it. Edge of your fabric, make sure it's far enough up so that your machine will pull it through. It doesn't have to be at the tippity tip edge. And then you're just sewing that line between the edge of the hemming tape and the fabric. So this is on the right side of the fabric too. I don't know if I said that. On the right side of the fabric, you sew the hemming tape on right at the edge of the hemming tape so that it overlaps the edge of your fabric. Then you go to the pressing mat and you fold your hem over to however long you want your hem to be, your hem length, and you press it. So you can use this to hem sleeves, hem shoulders, whatever you want to do. I think I accidentally, that's fine. And then after you've pressed it, so I have it pressed over for my hem, you go back and you do a straight stitch on the other side of the hemming tape. And here is my hemming tape for the hem, and here it is on the front side of my fabric, so you can't see that stitch where I attached the hem tape before I folded it over. You can only see the stitch where I actually stitched my hem tape. Alternatively, you could hand stitch the hem tape in place when you're sewing the hem. Hand stitching takes forever, but you can do that just like when you were doing a double fold hem, you could hand stitch it. So hemming tape is an alternative to a double fold hem. I haven't used it a ton just because I kind of find it, I'd rather just do a double fold hem, but it's there, it exists. So if you have fabric that you can't press for whatever reason, it might be a really good option. Instead of using a double fold hem or trying to do a French seam or flat felled, hemming tape is an option. Or like Lena said, bias tape. Bias tape. Do people want to see me do something with bias tape? I might do bias tape. I see a mistake. There's one, I have a way I really like using bias tape when I have to use it. So I'll go ahead and show you guys that way since I have another 30 minutes in my class. Should have prepped more ways. Also, there is a tutorial I made during my apprenticeship about seam finishes. I have shared it to the post-class discussion on the Discord. I assume it's in the guild library as well. Or I can send it to you individually if you message me. It goes over 4 different seam finishes step by step. I need to get my bias. Step by step, the 4 different seam finishes that it goes over are flat felled, French seam, pinking shears, which I no longer own and I'm sad. And zigzag are the 4 different seam finishes it talks about. So you can find that on the Discord, or you can find it at the guild library on the Geddon, Artificer Guild library on the Belgarth Geddon. So bias tape. Anya likes bias tape, apparently. That's fine. You're allowed to like bias tape, Anya. So I'm using, hold up, a single fold bias tape. I haven't used bias tape a ton for seam finishes, so Alina, if I do something wrong, yell at me. But I'm gonna start with my right sides together. Oh, I should move so that you guys can see my machine again. Sweet. There you go. And then when I do bias tape, I open it up. I'm actually gonna trim it so that my edges of my fabric are completely even. If I spent time cutting it out and stuff, they would already be even. You won? Sorry, I got distracted by the chats. You won best feast garb with bias tape. Master Sven? Involving bias tape, okay. Make garb using only bias tape. So like no fabric, just bias tape? I'm just asking for clarification on that one. No fabric, just bias tape. Interesting. Okay. I like Alina's reaction though. She's giving a, oh no, the horror. So bias tape, when I do bias tape, I don't try and fold it up so it fits perfectly on both sides like that, because I find I can never succeed doing that. So, and then it just looks messy because I have to do multiple stitches. So what I've started doing, and when someone taught me how, was I opened up my bias tape, and you can do this for single or double fold. Open up my bias tape so that right side of bias tape is to wrong side of fabric. And then I sew the edge of my bias tape down onto my fabric with a straight stitch. And I'll do it this way if I'm doing it to finish a seam, or doing it to trim an edge, or make a neckline or a sleeve or a hem look a little bit prettier. I'll still do it this way. So now I have that folded edge down, and it's stitched close to the edge of the fabric at the edge of the bias tape. Now is when I fold it over. And I like using double fold, not single fold, but I got single fold cheap. So now is when I fold it over my fabric so that both sides are visible. And as you can see, you can't, it's got a lovely fold right there and right there. And then if I cared enough, I would iron it down just to be safe, but I'm just gonna stitch it. So I have it folded over on my fabric, and I'm stitching close to the edge of my bias tape. Always back stitching, always doing a security stitch. And that gives me a lovely bias finish right there. And then if you'll notice on the other side, that top stitch for the bias there isn't actually catching the other side of the bias tape, but that's okay because we sewed it down on the inside, so it still won't come undone there. And I find that my biases just look a lot nicer when I do it that way. And then since this is a seam that I did it on and not a hemline or anything, I would still fold it over, iron it down. Because ironing makes seams look nice.
It also locks in your threads and stitches.
I did not know that. That's cool. And then I could either, since this is a seam finish, I could do a top stitch there to keep it from flopping around, or I could leave it as it is. I think I'll leave it as it is just to kind of show off the bias effect if I ever want to use it as an example in my future. But that is an option if you don't like the flappy effect to do a top stitch. He is cool. So we have now done 2 more seam finishes than I was expecting. We have bias seam finish. That's my favorite way to do bias tape. I do it this way for finishing a seam or for doing hemlines or sleeve extras. We have hem tape on both a seam finish and a hem. We have French seam. We have the flat filled seam. And we have the zigzag seam, which I apparently didn't press. Give me a moment. You guys have all seen me press stuff. You don't need to do it anymore. Okay. And we have a zigzag seam. Are there any seam finishing questions? Comments? Concerns? Things you want me to change next time I teach this class? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to take the extra 20 minutes I have and tell you all about all the other amazing classes we have going on today. So I'm going to pull up the Google slide, and then I'm going to screen share so you guys can also see the Google slide along with me, especially since this is live streaming right now. Screen share. Here we go. Share. So here we have the class I just finished, seam finishes. In 30 minutes, we will have leather in all its details. At 2 o'clock, we will have the Gandalf satchel. At 3 o'clock, we will have Belgoth Guild's Q&A. At 4 o'clock, we will have mead making 1 to 100. At 5 o'clock, we will have leather watercolor dye techniques. At 6 o'clock, we will have beginner mistakes with commercial patterns. At 7 o'clock, we will have the history of peerage. And our last class for today is at 8 o'clock, basic bread without an oven. So Saturday, we have a whole line of classes going from 10 in the morning till 9 in the evening. So I will be announcing all of those Saturday morning. Stop share. And that's all. See you in 20 minutes.